The wind carried no sound, only heat and dust. Weston Cade spotted her from the saddle just past the cottonwood bend, lying crooked at the edge of the arroyo like something dropped and forgotten by God. At first, he thought it was a trick of shadow and stone. Then the breeze shifted, and her arm moved, barely, but enough. A twitch against the earth. He dismounted without hurry. Crows scattered from the brush, their wings cracking through silence like bone snapping. She lay half covered in grit and dried blood, skin split open along her ribs, lips pale, cracked, caked in dust. One eye swollen shut, the other barely open, staring, but not at him. Her dress, tattered and soaked dark at the waist, was Apache made. A beaded belt lay broken beside her, snapped as if torn away in struggle. Her feet were bare. Her breath came in shallow, stuttering pulls. Weston said nothing. He didn't ask what happened. Didn't ask who she was. That could wait. If she didn't die. Gently, he slipped his arms beneath her, one behind her neck, the other under her knees. Her body was light, too light, as if grief itself had hollowed her out. She didn't wince or stiffen, just exhaled something between a breath and a surrender. That was the worst part. Not the wounds, not the silence, the stillness. He rode slow, careful not to jostle her. The sun bled low across the canyon walls, casting them both in rust and gold. She leaned against his chest, unconscious, head lolling with the rhythm of the horse. He kept a hand on her shoulder, steadying her like she might dissolve if he let go. At the cabin, he didn't call out or fumble for words, just pushed the door open with his boot and laid her down on the worn cot by the window. The room smelled of pine smoke and leather. He covered her with a faded quilt and fetched water, boiled it, poured whiskey into a tin bowl, and set to cleaning the wounds. She didn't wake. As dusk gave way to night, the coyotes started howling. He sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the fire crackle and her breath warble. Once she whimpered, not in fear but memory. He dipped a cloth in the whiskey and pressed it gently to her brow. The next morning, she opened her eyes. They were dark, still, watching. He didn't flinch. "You're at my place," he said. "Name's Weston." She didn't speak, only blinked. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He offered water. She took it with trembling fingers. The tin cup looked too big in her hands. Later, she tried to sit up and failed. Her arms gave out. Weston caught her before she hit the floor and laid her back down. "I ain't gonna ask questions," he murmured. "You don't have to talk." Still nothing. But her gaze didn't leave him. In the days that followed, she healed in pieces, ate little, slept often. Her silence held shape, not just absence of sound, but weight. It pressed into the corners of the cabin, into the spaces between his movements. But Weston didn't feel it. He moved slow, deliberate, cooked, fetched water, sat near, but never too close. She watched him. Once, she reached toward the kettle on the stove and flinched when her arm gave out. He steadied it. Their hands met for half a breath, calloused and delicate. Her fingers retracted like a breath caught short, but her eyes didn't turn away. On the fifth day, as the sky purpled toward night, she stood. Weston was at the corral, shoveling feed. He turned at the sound of the door. She stood on the porch, barefoot, leaning against the frame. She stepped forward slowly, one hand trailing along the railing. She crossed the short space between them and placed something in his hand. A small object, smooth and warm from her palm. A carved feather made from driftwood. Rough but careful. He turned it over once. Twice. "You made this." She nodded. Still no voice. But something passed between them then. Not thanks, not explanation. Something quieter. She stood there for a moment more, then turned back toward the cabin. That night, he left a clean set of clothes folded on the cot. She wore them the next morning. It rained for the first time in weeks. The earth drank deep, and so did the quiet between them. In town, the lawmen talked about movement up near the ridgeline. 5 riders, traveling light. Apache territory. Nobody knew why. Nobody asked. Weston sharpened his knife that night, then stood at the window, watching her sleep. Her breath came easier now, deeper, and in the moonlight, for the first time, he saw the scar along her throat. Long, deliberate, like someone once tried to take her voice, and nearly succeeded. The mule cart groaned over the rutted trail, its wheels dragging dust into noon air. Weston Cade kept one hand firm on the reins, the other resting near his hip, always. Beside him sat Sayin, wrapped in a patched wool shawl, her gaze steady beneath the brim of an old straw hat he'd trimmed to fit her. Her silence didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt earned, as if every word she didn't speak had already been tried in fire. When they rolled into town, conversation slowed. Men tipped their hats out of habit, then lowered their eyes. Women turned their backs. A child pointed until his mother pulled his hand away. The sound of hammering paused. Dust hung heavier. Weston tied off at the water trough outside Tally's mercantile. Sayin didn't move. She watched the sheriff cross the street toward them, boots loud against the boards. Sheriff Montreux was a thin man made thinner by worry, his badge dull with time and indecision. "She with you?" he asked, chin twitching in Sayin's direction. "She is," Weston said. "She Apache?" Weston looked up, slow and measured. "You got a law against being?" "No," Montreux said quickly. "Just word as some riders passed through the canyon 2 nights back. 5 of them. Didn't stop to chat. Folks are nervous." "Let them be." Montreux shifted. "You know how this town is, Cade. Folks don't like surprises." Weston turned his head just enough to reveal the edge of a scar that ran along his temple. "Neither do I." They left the sheriff standing there and stepped into the store. Tally's wife narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Sayin walked with the carved cane Weston had made, its leather grip smoothed by her fingers. She gathered herbs, cloth, lye. Weston handled the weight of the grain sacks. They spoke through gestures, half-sentences, and the shared rhythm of 2 people who understood what could be said without words. As they returned to the cart, a voice slithered from the saloon porch. "Didn't know you were raising strays now, Cade." The man wore a cocky grin and spurs he didn't earn. Sayin paused. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. "Hope she don't go scalping you in your sleep." Weston didn't answer. Sayin stepped forward. Her eyes met the man's like still water meeting flame. He looked away first. Back at the cabin, Weston laid out supplies while Sayin prepared food. Her hands moved like memory, clean, precise, patient. That night, she left a leather cord on the table. At its center was a carved piece of bone, shaped like a half-moon. He recognized it as one of the ribs from the rabbit they'd shared 3 nights ago. He picked it up, held it against his chest for a moment, and then placed it on the windowsill where it caught the light of the dying fire. The next day, they repaired the fence. Weston lifted the rails. Sayin tied the knots. Her silence no longer filled the space between them. It threaded it. When a hawk passed overhead, its shadow cutting across the yard, she looked up sharply. Weston noted the way her shoulders tensed. "Trained. Alert. Who taught you to fight?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him, only tapped her chest twice with her fingertips. "Family." He nodded, then returned to his work. That night, they sat beneath the stars. Weston strummed a weather-worn guitar with strings that whispered more than they sang. Sayin carved a feather into a scrap of soft wood. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and something faint. Smoke. The next morning, Weston found fresh tracks near the canyon mouth. 5 horses, 4 sets of boots, 1 pair dragging slightly, like a limp or a man too drunk to care how he walked. He knelt beside them, pressed his palm into the dirt, then rose. Back at the cabin, Sayin was sharpening her knife with the methodical calm of someone who'd done it long, before she had a reason to. He watched her for a moment. "Something's coming," he said. She looked up and didn't ask what. Instead, she reached under the cot and drew out a bundle she hadn't touched in days. Inside was a faded tunic, a loop of braided hair, a bone-handled blade with dried blood still on the grip. Weston met her eyes. "They think you're theirs?" She nodded once. He took a breath, slow and steady. "They're wrong. That night, the wind didn't sing. It watched, quiet, waiting. And somewhere far off, the coyotes didn't howl. They listened. The sound came before the shape, hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, echoing across the dry canyon wall, like a sermon headed for judgment. Weston stood on the porch with a rifle resting against the crook of his arm, his eyes narrowed into the light. The sun hovered just above the mesa ridge, staining the horizon copper. Heat wavered in the distance, distorting the five figures as they emerged, horses dragging long shadows behind them like ghosts tethered to regret. Sayin stood inside the doorway, half shrouded in shade, the knife tucked into her belt and the old tunic now tied across her chest. Her silence wasn't fear. It was the patience of someone who had already survived what others couldn't name. The men reined in at the edge of the yard. Dust settled around their boots. The one in front dismounted last, boots thudding hard against the earth. Hollis Birk, lean, rope muscle and dead eyes. A smirk played on his lips, but it never reached anything human. "Evenin', Cade," he said, his voice like gravel rubbed against old leather. "Didn't expect to find you playing house with stolen goods." Weston didn't reply. He just shifted slightly, the rifle staying low but certain. "She ain't yours," Hollis went on. "Her people gave her up. She's property now, and I always collect what I'm owed." Sayin stepped onto the porch behind Weston. Her face betrayed nothing, but her hand rested just above the knife's hilt. Wind caught her shawl and tossed it like a flag that refused to hang limp. "You got 5 guns and 1 reason," Weston said finally. "Make sure it's worth dying for." 2 of the riders chuckled low. 1 spat, but no one moved. Hollis tilted his head. "You'd kill for her?" Weston looked back at Sayin, just briefly. Her eyes met his, calm, unreadable. But something passed there. Not plea, not desperation. Just the soft certainty of belonging. "I'd die for her," he said. That was enough. The second man drew first. Too early, too quick. Weston didn't wait. The shot cracked sharp as thunder. The man dropped before his pistol cleared his coat. Chaos followed. Dust erupted. The horses reared. Hollis ducked left, firing twice. 1 shot clipped Weston's shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. Sayin dropped low, rolling across the porch, her blade flashing in the blur of smoke and shouting. Weston hit the dirt hard. Pain screamed through his arm. He crawled behind the water trough as another shot split the post near his head. He raised a rifle and fired blind, caught a rider's leg. The man screamed, tumbled, was trampled by his own horse. Sayin moved like shadow and bone. One of the gunmen climbed onto the porch, pistol raised. She met him halfway. The blade found his ribs. He staggered, gasping, trying to speak her name, but not knowing it. She pulled free, pushed him back with a boot to the chest, and he crumpled without grace. Then silence. Smoke drifted low. 1 horse limped into the sagebrush. 2 men lay dead. 1 gone. 1 groaning in the dirt, bleeding from the thigh. Hollis stood alone now, his revolver raised, but his hand was shaking. "Think this is over?" he rasped. Weston limped forward, gun lowered, his shirt soaked with blood. "No," he said. "I think it's just begun. But not for you." Sayin emerged behind Hollis without a sound, the tip of her blade resting against the space where spine meets neck. Hollis stiffened. "You can leave," Weston said. "But if I see you again, I won't bury you." Sayin said nothing, but the blade bit just enough to draw a line of red before she stepped back. Hollis didn't speak. He just mounted and rode. Fast. The sun dipped behind the hills as the quiet returned, thick as smoke. Weston sat hard on the porch steps, breath shallow. Sayin knelt beside him and ripped the shirt open at the shoulder. Blood poured from the wound, but she was steady. Her hands worked fast, clean, practiced. "You all right?" he asked, voice frayed. She didn't answer, just nodded and tightened the cloth. Later, when the fire crackled and the air cooled, Weston lay stretched on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. Sayin sat beside him, her back against the wall, staring into flame. She hadn't cleaned the blood from her hands. "I didn't ask why they came," Weston murmured. Sayin looked at him. Her face was unreadable. "I didn't need to." He watched her for a moment longer, then closed his eyes. She reached across the space between them and set the carved feather, now darkened with soot, onto his chest. Her fingers lingered there just a moment. Outside, the moon rose over the prairie like a promise half-kept. In the distance, a second set of hoofprints began to form. Ones neither of them saw yet. Riders that hadn't come for blood, but something harder to fight. Something called truth.